Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're so pleased you could join us today as we celebrate 10 years of MITx and chat about the evolution of online learning. I'm thrilled to share this milestone with you. I'm Dana Doyle. I'm the director of the MITx program, and I work with the most amazing team known as the MITx team. And we support faculty to help deliver our courses. We do a million other things, but that's our primary goal in what we're going to look at today. I'd like to recognize everyone who helped make MITx so successful. We have MIT faculty, we have the MITx staff, digital learning lab scientists and fellows, learners around the world, and most importantly, MIT and the people who've donated and supported our program. Now, I'm going to make a few housekeeping notes and I'm going to read them. So please, I'm going to be a little static, but I want to make sure I get this right. Okay, so today's discussion will be recorded and shared with our community. Your participation today indicates your willingness to share your questions and comments you make in this recording. If you would like captions, please click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. To ask a question, please type it into the Q&A box. Now, we received over 200 questions so far in comments today, and so we plan to try to answer some of those in a blog or on our social media. So we're going to try to get, all the good questions answered so you get all the information you can. Now, before we begin this exciting discussion, we'd like to share a wonderful impact video that our team put together.
Online learning has become an indispensable tool, not just for university students and professionals, but for anyone who wants to learn. Over the past decade, the immensely talented MITx team has helped shape that experience.
Higher education is going through an extraordinary transformation right now, and MIT is making a statement to the world through MITx. And MIT is also transforming itself through MITx.
The fact that you can get access to MIT quality courses, if you've got internet connection, is just an incredible impact.
The only thing that matters is a desire to learn, and it's never too late to start.
It's an extraordinary learning opportunity for millions of independent learners, openly available to anyone, anywhere, anytime, any place.
There are more learners around the world that have completed successfully a course than we have living MIT alumni. That's broadening our reach in a way that just, is striking.
Online learning kind of opens up the opportunity to engage with people from around the world.
All of these people can come to the same course with different goals, interests, and levels of engagement and find what they're looking for. And that's pretty magical.
On MITx, you can experiment, you can put in simulations, you can put in a game, a drawing program, and it has helped the world recognize the value of online. It's great that MIT took a lead 10 years ago to make this happen.
We didn't know 10 years ago that understanding what mRNA is would become a common conversation, but our courses can help people with that understanding. From deciding a major in a specific discipline, to applying to a new job, to truly living the concept of lifelong learning during retirement.
You invest in yourself by learning something you could not have otherwise, and a success could literally change your life. 10 years of MITx is a testament to how important education is at any level.
We're in the 10th year of MITx version 1, but just at the very beginning of the MITx for the future, and that's what makes things so exciting at this moment.
I've been stopped in airports and hotel lobbies by people who say, I took your course and it changed my career path. It's not just me, but that's other people offering MIT courses. You're changing people's lives in a really positive way. That's both the excitement and the spirit of MITx.
MITx, congratulations and happy anniversary.
All right, thank you for sharing the video. All right, now I want to say I'm so proud of everyone who has participated and has had a hand in our success. All right, now let's get to the fun part where we get to hear all about what people know, what people think. Now I'm joined with an esteemed group of educators and learners who are going to talk about how they've interacted with MITx, what they think, etc. So I've got Eric Grimson, Chancellor for Academic Advancement at MIT, Joey Gu, MIT lecturer and MITx digital learning scientist, Shira Fruckman, assistant manager of educational technology and our lead learning designer at MITx, and Abigail Bamboye, social venture enthusiast, MITx MicroMasters credential holder. All right, now I'm going to start off with Eric. Eric, can you tell us what this milestone means to the Institute and to the MIT community?
Thanks, Dana. I think it's worth starting actually with MIT's mission statement, which basically says we educate students, we create knowledge, and we apply that knowledge to the great challenges of the nation and the world. When Raphael Reif conceptualized MITx, he was very much driven by that mission perspective, especially how we can tackle the global challenge of access to quality education and how we can use our knowledge of pedagogy to deliver quality content remotely, to anyone, anywhere. We, of course, focus on educating our own on-campus students, but we have an opportunity to educate a much wider array of global learners. MITx was also conceptualized in part by MIT's vision of its recent capital campaign, whose theme was making the world a better place. We know that there are many more highly qualified learners than we'll ever be able to admit to our on-campus experience. And we know there are many learners of all ages who want to use MIT quality educational experiences to improve their lives. So we wanted to see if we could use MITx to help make the world a better place. To see the impact of MITx 10 years later is really incredibly gratifying. We've had successful learners from ages 8 to 80 from virtually every part of the world access MIT hard, MIT quality educational experiences. When the first version of the MOOC that I co-created with Annabelle and John Guttag ran in 2012, I'm told that the only recognized countries or territories where we did not have a registrant were the Falkland Islands, Svalbard, I had to look it up, and French Guiana. So the global reach is really immense. But when Raphael and his team conceptualized MITx, we also thought that we could learn about learning, that we could use MITx to improve our understanding of pedagogy and to bring those lessons back to our on-campus teaching. And that's been another huge success. Virtually every MIT undergraduate, every term, has at least one class that extensively uses MITx tools. Many faculty have revised the structure and delivery of their on-campus classes based on the lessons they've learned from MITx. And this engenders a wonderful virtuous cycle in which on-campus improvements are applied to online experiences, which inform better on-campus opportunities. One really nice consequence of this, unfortunate but nice, was that when COVID-19 hit and MIT had to rapidly pivot to remote teaching, many of us on the faculty and the staff already had extensive experience in delivering that online material. So it's a huge impact, and it's only the beginning, as Krishna said. All of this, of course, has been the product of efforts from a large number of people: faculty, teaching staff, students, MITx staff, IS&T staff, and many others. And I want to personally say thank you to all of them. And I would also like to thank the many donors who helped make this possible, who financially supported MITx. And among those thousands of contributors, I want to explicitly thank MathWorks and the Jeremy and Joyce Wertheimer Foundation for their very generous support, what really is helping make the world a better place. So thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Eric. So that, yes, MITx is truly a community experience. Now, I want to tie in what you said into what we learn from the online teaching that we do, how we bring it back to campus. And I think the perfect person to talk about that is Joey. So now Joey, as I mentioned, is one of our DLL scientists, which is short for Digital Learning Lab. And Joey, could you talk a little bit about some of the changes you've seen in online learning over the past couple of years that you've been working here?
Sure. Thanks, Dana. So let me first speak about the Digital Learning Lab. So I'm a member of the Digital Learning Lab, and we're a group of academic instructional staff at MIT. So we are in charge of everything digital learning. So that goes from massive open online courses, but also, as Eric was talking about, the application of such digital content to residential teaching here on campus. But what's unique about the group is we come together as a group and we discuss pedagogy and digital learning, but we each report to a particular academic department. So that's really unique about the group because we're appointed as lecturers or instructors in these different academic units, and we each hold an advanced degree in our specialization. So that gives us domain-specific knowledge to work on the content in our subject area. But we also have the technical skills and experience in digital learning and educational science. And that creates a powerful combination to create what I would think is, by me and my colleagues, quality courses on MITx. So both are important skills, and because of our knowledge and experience in both areas, we serve as the liaison really between the faculty in our department and the MITx staff, right? So on the one hand, sometimes we're instructors ourselves. We create problems and other digital assets like graphics and videos for the course. But on the other hand, we work with MITx staff. So things like media and making sure the course is accessible to learners with different needs, and making sure third-party content have the right intellectual property clearance. So let me give you one example of the kind of work that we do. So one course that I'm really proud of that I created with Professor Martin Bazin in our department with a 1050 analysis of transport phenomena. So that is a core graduate subject in our department. It is graduate subjects, I would say, are still not super represented online these days, right? You see a lot of high school subjects, many undergraduate subjects, but not many graduate subjects because there are unique challenges associated with them. So things like, for example, when we teach the course on campus, we assign these really long problems that often require pages and pages of math, right? So that's not really a format that we can easily scale up to teach in an online format. So someone in my position would think about, for example, what problem types I would choose for different problems. How would I go about breaking down the entire problem, scaffolding the problems in a way that the students can learn both the conceptual and the mathematical aspects of the problem. And then things that, we ask students to write down differential equations on a piece of paper. You can't do that in a browser. So is there a way to intuitively input advanced equations that's more than just, simple math, but maybe differential equations? And can we create interactive animated graphics to really illustrate the solution to a dynamical problem? And also, things that are relatively, not fancy sounding, but important, like having really detailed solutions so the students can really learn on their own without the level of input that we have in a residential course here on campus with teaching assistants and so forth. And for that, we have a discussion forum where we interact with the learners and see where they're coming from. It's just so amazing to always see learners coming from all different backgrounds and interact with them and see themselves interact with each other. So with that, I'll pass it back to Dana, and I look forward to telling you more about the work that I do.
Great. Thank you, Joey. And I do want to take just a second to note that the Digital Learning Lab really is an important part of working with our faculty and with MITx. And I think one of the key things that the Digital Learning Lab brings to our course development is that because they consistently work on courses, sometimes, several courses over a period of years, it really gives them the opportunity to learn from what they've done and go to places in digital learning that a course team that's a brand new may not have the knowledge or the experience or the time to get to. So it's really important that we have the Digital Learning Lab to be able to support our efforts in continuing to impact online education. All right, now I want to turn to the experience of making a MOOC. That very short sentence, but wow, that can be unpacked into many, many, many parts. And so I'm going to ask Shira to talk a little bit about her role in our process in supporting our faculty in designing and making these courses. Shira?
Thank you, Dana. I'm excited to be here, and thank you all for joining us in celebrating MITx. As Dana mentioned, I'm Shira Fruchtman, Assistant Manager of Educational Technology and Lead Learning Designer at MITx. That's a mouthful. I haven't been at MITx for the full 10 years of its existence, but I have been here for about 8 of them. And there have been a lot of changes over that time. but I have to say the one thing that's remained constant is how great the MITx team is. And Dana alluded to this before. We're a fun bunch of people and a team that likes to get things done and likes to get them done well, if I may pat ourselves on the back a little bit. So first, I'd like to talk about the MITx team as a whole. I'm one of about 20 people working at MITx. We are typically working behind the scenes to support MIT faculty as they develop and run their MOOCs. The MITx team consists of different service subgroups that include project administrators, media specialists, intellectual property coordinators, accessibility experts, educational technologists, and finance and communications teams. I think I got everybody. There are on average about 2 to 3 people in each of those teams, some more, some less, and one person from each of those teams is delegated to a course. So we're actually a pretty small group supporting a large number of MIT MOOCs that are produced every year. I work on the educational technology team, supporting MIT faculty and other members of their course development team, which we call the course team, on the platform, consulting them before the course begins, training them on how to set up and run a course, evaluating tools as necessary, and answering questions and fixing issues throughout the run of a course. Now, if a team doesn't have a digital learning lab scientist or fellow like Joey, who's an expert in pedagogy and online learning, I will meet with the course team when they're starting out to discuss some of the best practices in building a MOOC. Now, we discuss a lot of different variables and practices, and I'm not going to go through all of them here, though I do cover techniques that have been shown in the learning science research to be effective in improving understanding and acquiring knowledge, such as active engagement, continual practice of skills, spacing and interleaving of content, worked and faded examples for scaffolding of content, reflection of one's own learning, and the application of knowledge. We also talk about the importance of feedback and making it actionable so that learners can use the feedback that they receive. But here I want to discuss what we typically start off our conversation with, and this includes some of the differences between a course in an MIT classroom and a MOOC. Now, when this conversation starts off, many faculty think I mean we want them to water down the content to make it easier for the online audience. But I assure them that that is not at all what I'm saying. We actually want the rigor to be the same. We want MIT content around the world, but we also want MIT content to be accessible to our global audience. So we talk about how they may go about doing that. Sometimes that may be reducing the amount of content that they're delivering or increasing the length of time for learners to complete it. Most of our MOOC learners are doing this part-time and will have limited time and resources to go through the same amount of content in the same number of hours per week that an MIT student would. In addition, they're coming from all different backgrounds, and some additional content and or resources may be required to make sure everyone is starting out from a similar place and has the prior knowledge required to build upon it. Now, we continue this conversation about differences, thinking about some hidden learning moments that happen both for faculty and for students. On campus, faculty are face-to-face with students. They can see facial expressions. They can see peers whispering to one another when there's confusion. Faculty have office hours when learners can come and talk to them. There's peer learning in the hallways, in the dorm rooms, in the cafeteria. And there's also recitations. Faculty member can actually change up their content on the fly on a particular day when they realize that maybe there's a bunch of confusion and they need to review some of the content they've already delivered or restate it in a way that might be more understandable. But this doesn't happen in an asynchronous online MOOC. Courses are built from beginning to end prior to the launch of the course, or at least that's our hope, so that they can be beta tested. So we talk about how they need to be much more intentional when they're developing a MOOC. They need to think about where the confusing parts are, where the misconceptions lie, the common misconceptions, and they need to scaffold more of the content so that learners are supported along the way. Now, I think I'm out of time, but I'm happy to take questions regarding these conversations that I have with course teams prior to them delivering their MOOC. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Shira. And thanks for kind of getting that little insight into how we help our faculty make their courses. And as Shira said, the team is fantastic and we work very closely together. And I want to say, a lot of the team members have been at MITx, including myself, for years and years. And then we have new members, and somehow we all manage to just fit together so well. And it's just fantastic. So thank you, Shira. All right, now to round out our topic, I would like to turn to Abigail for her extensive experience as a MOOC learner and for being as a MITx MicroMasters certificate holder. Now, Abigail, can you tell us what your experience has been like as a student and how the MITx MOOCs have helped in your academic goals?
Sure. So for me, I'd say undertaking the MicroMasters in Data, Economics and Development Policy, which I did across 2020, was a journey of growth. And from that time, during that period, in the actual learning, but also in the time since, and it's now been a year that's passed. Some of the things that drew me to wanting to do this particular MicroMasters, which is composed of 5 different MITx courses, were the content, the opportunities that could come from me kind of having a grasp of this content, but also the community that was kind of being built around by MITx. In terms of the content, some of the things that really started to call my attention were that I could learn about topics in international development, and I could understand a little bit more in terms of economics and various things that I had a curiosity about, but didn't necessarily have the opportunities to explore it in my immediate circle. And then the fact that I could do this kind of at my own pace, asynchronously from my home, potentially like just virtually, also added that extra element of flexibility. Then to see some of the amazing lecturers that would be teaching it, like literally Nobel Prize winners, it's a type of academic experience that it feels very surreal, and that you're there learning and getting to get this cool content which you can think about in the future. So then kind of as I did more of the courses, I began to actually find other learners who were taking the courses sometimes at the same time as me, sometimes a little bit later, and we were able to share the things that we were learning, the ways we wanted to use it, and actually that ability to network with people who maybe completely live on a different continent to you, but you have some of the same passion and ideas, I think is really brought together in these kind of academic spaces. So one of the highlights of the courses, of these courses, was being able to get involved in these types of opportunities. So I could say that my motivation for wanting to stick through 5 courses that were incredibly rigorous and academically intensive really came from the fact that there were these 3 pillars really calling me along. And then in terms of how it's shaped my life since, I think the fact that I've been able to kind of grow in credibility, coming from an engineering background, but studying something that's quite a bit away from what that was doing, it's been a tool that I've been able to use to kind of share my passion, but also to sometimes bring something to the table in terms of areas where I might not have had professional experience in my job. I've been able to bring some of the perspectives that I've gained from this learning community, from the people I've met, and from the courses itself. And I think there's also been an element of additional literacy, being able to engage in topics and knowledge that I just didn't have the knowledge to be able to understand and interpret before. Now there are times when I can look at, say, statistical papers, and it doesn't seem quite so daunting because there has been this amazing course that I've been able to do as part of the MicroMasters. And I'd say, like, in the time since, the ability that I've been able to have some great conversations with other people looking to perhaps pursue online learning goals, looking to either do a career pivot or even just specialize more in a certain area in their life. And having gone through this academic experience, I've been able to shed insight on what I've learned, even the practicalities of how do you work full-time or study full-time, but also take extra courses on the side? What does that look like? How do you define the learning goals around that? So as a whole, it's been a massive pleasure to discover the courses offered by MITx, and it's also spurred me on to keep learning and keep growing in the future.
All right. Thank you very much. I do have a quick follow-up question for you, Abigail.
Sure.
If you had 1, maybe 2 pieces of advice to give to a learner who signs up for a course and they start it and maybe they're, a little concerned, maybe, because as you mentioned, they are very rigorous. What kind of advice would you give to somebody to be successful in doing their course?
I'd say to be successful in doing your course is part of it is just probably at the start of your course, writing out why you want to do that specific course. Like how is the knowledge you're gaining there going to hopefully change your life, and what things do you really want to pick out of it? And within that goal, keep it somewhere close by, so when it's really tough, you can have that reminder. But also remember, even in a normal academic setting, nobody gets things 100% the first time. There were parts of when I was doing MicroMaster studies where actually it all came together when I was studying for the exam at the end. Like I'd really struggled with some of the weeks of homework, but actually having 10 weeks of knowledge versus 1 week was the difference that made it kind of more doable. And then the second thing I'd say is there are like these forum communities that build up, so you can reach out to kind of the TAs, the teaching assistants that help with that. And sometimes other learners will be able to give you hints and things. So don't struggle in silence, and remember why you started it in the first place.
I love that. Don't struggle in silence. I'm gonna like put that right up on my wall. Well, thank you very much, Abigail. It's good to know that the work that we do inspires other people, and that you that you gain so much from it. So I really appreciate you joining us today. All right, now I'm gonna pull in some questions that we received, and anybody can answer them. But I'm probably gonna just start off, and I'll pick who I think would be likely to answer it. And I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble to be like, yeah, interrupt each other and everything else. So maybe don't do that. But if you do have something you want to add, please just let us know, and we'll include you in there. So the first question I'm going to ask is, can you talk about a challenging aspect of a MOOC? And so I'm going to take that from two parts, which is, I'm going to come from the faculty standpoint, and I'm going to ask Eric, and then I'm going to ask Shira from the kind of in the weeds, getting in there and getting it online. So Eric, let's start with you.
Thanks, Dana. It was always nice to know I get the first hard question. I appreciate that. There are lots of challenges about making a MOOC, but I would pick out one. Shira mentioned it briefly. I just want to amplify it. As a faculty member making a MOOC, you don't have visual feedback. And in a live lecture, you can often read, how's the lecture going? Are your explanations sufficiently clear? Is the pacing right? You watch the students in the class, as Shira said. Are they following? Are they looking confused? Are they putting their hand up? Are they putting their hand up with one finger extended, which tells you it's not going well, and you really want to worry about it? You don't have that feedback. And so online, you've got to really think very carefully about how you want to design your remarks. You want to plan them out carefully. In my case, I will write them out in detail, and I will practice them. I'll do the full lecture 3 or 4 times before I actually go in and record it, because I want to be comfortable with, with the pacing. But the second part about visual feedback that I think is missing is, to be blunt, as a faculty member sitting in 26100 in front of 600 undergraduates, you get energized. You feed off of the reaction of the people there. If you're just in front of a camera, it's really easy just to become monotone because you're just talking to a camera. And so you got to be energized. You got to be active. I'm doing it now. And I think my point is that without the visual feedback, you can't react to how you're talking, and you have the danger of really becoming even more boring than normal. And so you have to plan ahead to try and make sure that that doesn't happen.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Shira?
So it takes a lot of time to create a really good online course. And it's essentially, sort of what I was talking about before. It's not just throwing up your videos up onto the screen and adding some questions, but it's really being intentional as you're developing the course and working through how you're going to present the material to the online learner. Some other challenging, that's sort of the pedagogical side of it. Some other challenging aspects of a MOOC are, just sort of what tools are available. A lot of times we faculty come and they say, well, we normally do this group project. How are we going to do that in a MOOC? And that's really difficult. Group projects in a MOOC that contains thousands of people is really difficult. So then we have to sort of think about how could we reevaluate what you actually want the learners to get out of that assignment and rethink it or reconfigure how they would put that on in their MOOC.
All right, thank you, Shira. That does sound challenging. And I've seen it. So yes, I confirm it's very challenging. All right. Now the next question I have, actually, I'm gonna ask the same question, slightly different for two people. So the question is to talk about something you've learned through developing or studying a MOOC that you may not have learned otherwise. So I'm gonna start with Joey. And so you come from, let's take you from the developing standpoint. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, gosh, there's so many things you learn from developing a MOOC. And actually, I would say that the privilege of being at the forefront of making MOOCs is you see all of it, right? All the little details and pieces. So, I've picked up so many things like editing videos, so things in digital media, web programming, JavaScript, right? And also communication, because we got to communicate with learners, but also managing, both managing up, working with the faculty, and managing down, working with graduate student assistants, and lots of writing. So all these skills aside, I think one thing that I learned making MOOC that I think I wouldn't have thought about otherwise was just new topics in my field, right? So it was interesting. I was working with Professor Razan making 1050, and then it was right around the time when COVID hit. So we were talking about COVID transmission, and then he was telling me about his calculations and research into COVID transmission. I was like, oh, why don't we make a MOOC out of that? And then, and we did, right? We spent a few weeks, very tight schedule, but we ended up launching a MOOC by the end of 2020, talking about the physics of COVID transmission. So, like as a chemical engineer, those are, natural topics that we think about, fluid flow, like droplets, right? So it really made me think about sort of what we're doing with these MOOCs, posing broader questions like science communication, right? Like maybe by making these MOOCs, we're communicating with the world, like what our leading scientists are thinking, right? And the role of the academics and the scientists in today's age, like maybe this is an important part of the academia too, in addition to just writing papers and having it peer reviewed by your colleagues. So yeah, I would say that was probably the most surprising thing I worked on as a digital learning scientist.
Okay, thank you, Joey. So Abigail, from the learning standpoint, what do you think that you learned that you would not have learned otherwise?
So I think there's a few mixes of things that I learned that I probably wouldn't have learned otherwise. Some are kind of more on the hard skill side of things, and others are more probably like softer and intangible, but they've come up in like pretty handy ways. So some of the like more hard skill type things are like the programming language R that is used quite commonly across social science and analysis. That, funny enough, actually came about to be something that was quite useful in my job, and I never would have thought that those two worlds would have collided. But had I not done the MicroMasters, I wouldn't have had that exposure. And I think even the small time when I used it in my job, it would have been like so much of a different experience. The other thing I've kind of learned from a hard skill perspective is things like around randomized control trials. They seem to feature in a lot of, I guess, how you can measure impact and how you can determine if something has worked. And kind of, it's not something you can really pick up overnight. So having a MOOC that was kind of almost dedicated to that has just changed my ability to, I guess, engage with and question data in different forms. And then some of the things that were a bit like on the softer side was probably a slightly better awareness in myself of when am I actively learning versus when am I passively learning. I think one difference between learning virtually versus learning in person is that when you're in an in-person environment, it is kind of fully immersive, like you can, like you're physically in a space. And so there are things you pick up on or that you might remember that kind of become memory hooks, like I know smells and sounds and things like that. Whereas when you're in a more virtual space, it's a slightly different experience. And therefore, kind of what are the techniques that I can use to learn information in this space, check that I'm engaged. And actually, when I'm now thinking about how I communicate to others, I am more, especially now that we're in this COVID virtual world, I'm more consciously thinking, what are the things I can do to ensure that there's like good engagement there, and that like it's not just a one-way flow of information, but there's a good continuous understanding. So a spectrum of things learned from doing MOOCs.
Excellent, thank you so much. All right, so now I have a really hard question. So Eric, you're up. What do you think is the future of online learning?
Boy, a nice, easy question. Thank you, Dana. I'm going to answer it two ways. I'm going to start by things that I think will change in online learning, and then I'll, at the end, sort of talk just more broadly. There are two trends that I think are likely to emerge in online learning that will actually make it in some ways more powerful than on-campus learning. The first is just better machine learning tools, especially to guide learners. One of Raphael's goals when he envisioned MITx was that we ought to have the ability to access massive amounts of data about how people go through material, how they learn, how they interact with the material. And we ought to be able to use that knowledge to provide hints to learners that discover a trend and realize, oh, people who struggled with this problem the same way you seem to be struggling with it, they found it really useful to use this resource or to go check out this video or bring in this little module from another course to help understand it. AI can really help with that. So to borrow an analogy from an MIT alum, think of the Khan Academy, but as an AI system, that when you solve a problem, you get guidance for where you might want to go next to the material. I think that that's something you could really do. And that's not easy to do in an on-campus class, but should be doable online. The other big trend I hope happens with and I think it will happen soon with online learning, is that we'll figure out better ways to build communities. And I want to acknowledge Shira said some of this, I think, earlier as well. But the on-campus experience isn't just listening to people like me in a lecture hall. In fact, a lot of us not listening to people like me in a lecture hall. It's a discussion in a dorm lounge or a fraternity lounge. It's a conversation in the infinite corridor. It's an interaction with peers as you realize, oh, others are struggling with this material the same way I am, or sharing an insight that makes it easier to see how to move forward. We need the equivalent in a very large, very distributed online community. And we have beginnings of pieces of it, but I think the more we can do with that, the more it's going to, again, enhance that experience really well. Dana, you asked actually a broader question. What's the future of online learning? It's not going away, but it will improve as we couple what we know about on campus with what we do on online and bring that back. Again, I go back to that virtuous cycle that the more we understand about what works well on online, that helps us experiment at MIT and lets us build something. And that symbiosis will accomplish, I think, one of the things that Raphael really started with. When he announced the launch of MITx, he said his goal was for MIT to educate 1 billion people around the world. I tried to persuade him that 100 million was a nice number. He said, no, we're going to educate 1 billion people around the world. We're getting there. But if that's our goal, we have to find a way to make that experience as both MIT hard, but MIT quality, and to really accomplish that idea that even if you never have a chance to take a class on campus at MIT, you can take a class from MIT anywhere, anytime, on your time.
Great, thank you, Eric. I keep giving you these hard questions, and you're a pro. All right, so we've had about 2,500 people register for the celebration, and we received some great feedback and questions. Now, there have been a lot of questions, and as I mentioned before, we're not going to get to all of them, but we're going to try to answer them in our blog posts, which you can access at the Open Learning website, through social media and things like that. But we do have some time left, so I'm going to go through a couple of the questions that have been submitted, and we'll see how we go. All right, so I've got a question from Asmalita. And her question is, what is the magic recipe to keep the learner engaged in online self-paced learning? So I'm going to direct that to Joey to start. And then given the amount of time, I think I'll probably then swing over to Abigail and see from your perspective, what did you find engaging in the courses that you took? And so let's start with Joey. Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dana. So my answer may not be as exciting as the question. I think it's just about quality content, really. It comes back to the basics. And actually, we often hear learners say, oh, MITx courses are just so great. They're the best, right? And I would say the reason, the big part of it, just having quality content, right? Making sure we really craft the content with the learners in mind, having detailed solutions to all the problems, choosing the problems carefully, right? And also having quality assurance, going through the content multiple times, making sure there are no mistakes. That's really important. I don't want to de-emphasize that. But also, as digital learning scientists and fellows, we also think about pedagogy, right? From a learner's perspective, if they're just doing the course on their own with very minimal TA help, is it sufficient for learners to, for example, engage in active learning, right? Are the problems scaffolded in a way that they can proceed from one problem to the next problem without interruption? Are the solutions giving, are we providing hints to the learners when they're solving their problems? And then, yeah, I think above all, it's just about having a passionate team of faculty, staff like myself, and graduate students come together. We're passionate about online learning, and we take charge and really put our hearts and time and effort into these courses. And that, I think that's really the magic of what happens.
Great, thank you, Joey. So Abigail, from your point of view, what have you seen in the online courses that you've taken that you found particularly engaging, or that, and you had mentioned a few things that really kept you going through the courses, but I would imagine the courses themselves really have to have some sticking power in order for you to keep coming back. So what was your experience?
So I definitely want to echo what Joey said. I think quality content is definitely a major driver of wanting to stick to a course. And I think also just having the right framing around that content. So having the course description really match up with what is like kind of entailed in that course. I think it's particularly helpful sometimes when the leader of that course actually lays out what exactly is going to be covered. I know, like when you're in an in-person lecture theatre, the very first lecture, this is what the lecturer does. But I think somehow it helps when you have maybe a series of weeks and there's like a series of videos to kind of have an understanding of what is going to be contained in that bubble, and to really have a really strong take home at the start of each session of what you'll like take away from the end of that session. I also think it's quite helpful to have times to interact with the content. So this will be worksheets, kind of deadlines, quizzes, things that get you to really think back about what you've learned throughout that entire week and kind of probe the content and the knowledge in different ways. And I think if you can do that in a way that's like accessible, but also at like the right intervals, it's that it gives you, I guess, some of that feeling of I'm accomplishing something here, but also like I'm having to process it, and it's not just kind of listening to a continuous stream of videos. And then the final thing I'd say is having kind of relatable case studies where possible is phenomenal, because when you can bridge the gap between it, I think this happens in conventional learning as well, but when you can bridge the gap between it being kind of a concept to something the student can engage with in real life, there's that extra element of, that's very cool, I want to know more. So wherever possible, doing those three things.
Great, thank you. Yes, sure.
Sorry, Dan, I just wanted to add one thing.
Yes,
and it's probably pretty obvious, and as Joey said and Abigail said as well, a self-paced course does not mean that there's nobody there watching it. The forum is always there, the faculty is always there, the TAs are always there to answer questions, to comment on learners' posts and things like that. So it's not a here's the course, go at it on your own. We'll see you at the end. But they're definitely, especially at MIT, the faculty and course teams are engaged with their learners as well. So they'll be there to answer the questions.
great, thank you. Yeah, that's important to know. All right, so I have a couple more questions that had been submitted. Now, the next question from Jacob is, do you think online learning could potentially fully substitute for classroom teaching in the future? Who am I gonna look at? Eric, he's ready. But you know what, Eric, I'm actually gonna start with Abigail, and then I'm gonna go to Eric. So Abigail, just from your experience as an online learner, and I'm assuming you have gone to school in person at some point, what do you think? Do you think that there could ever be an actual, like, no, it's completely online for everybody, for everything?
I think the two worlds will definitely exist in parallel for the foreseeable future. Part of the reason why I think that is it really depends on your objective. I think when it comes to online learning, normally there's almost quite a targeted, I want to learn this specific skill set, I want to learn this specific content set. Whereas I think part of the proposition for in-person learning is simply to grow in a three-dimensional way, whether that's literally kind of school, whether that's university, or whether that's, say, like an evening class. There's elements to being in that physical space, whether it's the networking, whether it's access to certain bits of equipment, or whether it's even just the ability to kind of, I know like society-wide, being a student with a student card is like a lot easier when it's like enrolled in an institution versus online. So kind of being able to have that experience, I think, is also a strong draw to learning in person. So from my perspective, I think the two roles will exist in parallel for those reasons.
Great, thank you. Eric.
Thank you, Dana, as always, for a good question. And actually, thank you to Abigail. I really appreciated your answer. I'm going to answer the question two ways. I think there are small elements where you could be done completely online. There's a particular topic that you need to understand something about, and you go to an online source to find that out. It's kind of like looking up something on Wikipedia. Well, you could have a video version of that. But I think of the question really as being asked, will this fully substitute for the experience you get at a university, a great university? I will not answer for MIT, although I know MIT's view on this, but I will simply say personally, no. I agree with Abigail. Online will amplify, online will help, online will augment. Online for some learners will provide things that they would not otherwise get. But in the near future, I don't see how it replaces that experience of sitting in a classroom with 400 of your closest friends going, what the hell is he talking about? And why doesn't it make any sense? Or just having that interaction on the way to class, or frankly, catching a faculty member as they're coming out of class for 2 minutes of a discussion about something, or solving a problem set late at night in a lounge in a living setting. The on-campus is as important as the material you gather. And in the near future, I think it will not fully replace it, in my view, but it will augment it. And we need to think about how to make both worlds really work well together.
Great, thank you, Eric. All right, so we've got about 13 minutes left. I have a few more questions that I'm going to go through. Let's see here. We've got one from Sam B. And Sam asks, what have you learned from the previous decade that can help us moving forward with teaching in a post-COVID world? All right, Joey, I'm going to go to you and let us know what you think.
Yeah, well, first of all, I should say I haven't been working on this for a decade, so I will only speak from my own experience, which is only a few years. But, I think the short answer is we identify things that work and really try to amplify those things, right? So, we kind of alluded to some of the trends in online learning, and I think that applies to not only online learners, but also just the way people learn in general, right? We have the internet at our disposal. So I think learning tends to be more granularized, tends to be more objective oriented. Like, I want to find out about this. So maybe let me Google that, or let me ask somebody about it and learn that skill, right? So there's a lot of that going on, even on campus, right? Like we see students do that in our courses. So that kind of leads to the question of how can we leverage online learning in that way? And yeah, I think as universities like MIT, our greatest assets is really the faculty and the affiliated brain power, maybe the graduate students as well. So sort of we can collectively have a lot of great academic output. And the question is, how do we leverage the output so the students can access that in a very granularized way? So I wanted to think about it. It just maybe we can think about diversifying the formats of those outputs, right? So in the old days, we have the textbook, maybe we have the in-person lecture, right? But now there's more formats we can utilize, right? We have web pages, and there's so many things that can go on the web page. We can have videos. We can also have text, but maybe that text is interactive. Maybe you can annotate it. There are going to be applets and interactive features and animations. So we're really talking about like just broadening the ways we can present information in addition to the old-fashioned things like textbooks and papers, right? So those things, I think will augment learning, and we shouldn't feel shy about bringing those into the way we teach conventionally. So here at MIT, in our residential classes, we do bring in digital tools, right? Maybe we assign them as homework problems, where the students play with an animated simulation and see how the solution behaves, right? Maybe they do a scaffolded problem where there's detailed solution with different colors and highlighting, right? These are all useful tools for learning, right? But I think the goal is to bring those tools slowly into the way we conventionally teach, to sort of incrementally change the way we educate and learn. And not to say we're going to replace in-person learning with online learning altogether and just see how that goes, which, we had to do during COVID to some degree. But I think a more incremental approach guided by experience is probably the preferred.
Great. Thank you, Joey. Eric, do you have something to add?
I want to add two things. One, maybe a little less about MITx, although it's appropriate, and one about MITx. One of the things that we experienced when we had to go online at MIT, when we had to pivot during COVID, was that things like the chat feature on things like Zoom actually turn out to be a great learning experience. My experience in a class of 600 in a big lecture hall is students are really reluctant to put their hand up and say, I didn't get that in front of all of their friends. But on a chat, they will do that. And in fact, we found during a lecture, a 90-minute lecture, if my colleague was lecturing during the chat, during the lecture, I might be answering 50 to 100 questions on the chat that help the learning more quickly. So a little less than MITx, but it's part of what we bring back when we're now teaching on campus. We will do everything live that way so that students can pose questions and somebody can answer them without interrupting the flow of the class. But related to that is, I think what we've learned from MITx is that empowering other students, especially students who are on top of the material, to help answer questions can actually really improve the learning. We do this with community TAs on MITx courses already, but we're bringing that back to on campus of basically creating communities where students can pose questions that other students answer, and two things happen. The student answering it improves their own understanding because they have to explain it well, which is really valuable. And the second one is it makes a community where a student is maybe a little less reluctant to ask the question because they're worried that if I ask it at the professor, they're going to think I'm an idiot and I don't want to ask the question. Of course we don't, but it really lets the students engage in clarifying their misunderstanding. And we're now using that on campus much more extensively. Of course, at times you do need a faculty member to step in and say, especially if it's an online discussion, sorry, that's not really the right answer. Here's where you want to go. But those two lessons, I think, have really come back on campus that we've learned coming out of COVID and coming out of what we've done on MITx that are going to apply to on-campus teaching.
Great, thank you. Now I'm going to pull one question that came in through the chat because I think this is a really important question, and I'm going to actually answer it myself, which I don't know if moderators are supposed to do that or not, but I'm going to go ahead because that's how I do things, as my team knows. All right, so the question was, what can we do to improve the recognition of online courses, especially by employers? Now, this is one of those difficult questions, but it's a really important question, right? It's almost kind of like, how do we attach value to online learning? And I want to say, first of all, that I think that the work that the MIT faculty have done and the MITx team and all the learners that have taken our courses have contributed to this, because I think that this is just a matter of time. Okay, this is you going to your employer, you going on a job interview, you going anywhere and noting, I did this and I learned this and I am ready to do this now. And as the employers, educators, other people see you able to do the work that you said you could do because you took an online course, it just proves your point. And over time, that will not seem odd. People will not hesitate to believe you when they start seeing on your resume or they start seeing in anywhere that you've taken these online courses. They'll register as something that brings value to what you can bring to an organization. So I think that my request is that you make sure that you say that you've taken your online courses and you celebrate the work that you've done and you make sure people know where you learned it. and therefore it will be valued. And it's just going to take some time, but I have already seen, since I've been here for 8 years, a big difference. I mean, I have people, we don't even have a mechanism where we were checking people and saying like, oh yes, that person did the work, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, they took the course, because, there isn't like a transcript like you get out of college, but I'm getting more and more calls from employers, from agencies, from universities to check and make sure that someone has actually taken the course they said they took. So I have seen a difference in the past 8 years that this is getting more attention and more value. So I think it's really just, giving it the credit that's due and giving yourself the credit that's due to you for doing the online work, because it can be challenging to be doing it on your own, on your computer, versus, being enrolled in a course on campus. So I would say that's how we would get more value attached to certificates. All right, so we're almost out of time. So I'm going to ask, Michael asks this question. This is a great question. What is the future of MITx? Eric, hi. You and I are to answer it, but you start, please.
Thanks, Dana. It's a great question, and I know people have been thinking about it. From the perspective of a learner, I don't think anything changes. So I'm going to say it two ways. First of all, MIT remains committed to providing access, as I've said, to MIT hard, MIT quality experiences to anybody around the world. And so, many of the courses, both currently offered on MITx through edX or that are planned to be launched, will continue to be available on that edX2U platform, and they will continue to be available under the same conditions. If a faculty member wants a course to be freely accessible, it'll be freely accessible. If they're going to have a certificate, there's a fee for it. But basically from, if you like, from the learner's experience, I don't think anything should change. Some faculty at MIT want to move their courses onto a nonprofit platform, and MIT is in the process of designing an alternative platform that will support some of those courses, and we will make that available. But to me, the key issue is MIT helped start this revolution, and we're committed to this revolution. We're committed to making as much available as we can while making sure that we can keep, the trains running, if you like. And so the future of MITx, for most of you will not see a difference. You want to take a new course, it's visible, and you will be able to take it under the conditions that you would have taken it in the past. Faculty have some choices, but for the most part, I don't think it's going to change.
All right, I think that the only change that I see is more fantastic things. All right, and as Shira had mentioned, there are some challenges with online learning, and we consistently try to tackle those, like, for example, group projects and things like that. And I think that, especially as I had mentioned earlier with the Digital Learning Lab, who do the cumulative experience of learning and building on what they know so that we can expand how we teach online, you're going to see new exciting things. And as our faculty, every year I see more and more MIT faculty getting interested in making online courses. So you're going to see, topics and courses that you have not seen before from MITx, and you're going to see new ways of interacting with the content. And I think it's going to be really exciting. So I'm really excited about the future, and I hope you guys are also. Now, I think that's going to wrap up our question section. And I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is, we're having a fantastic celebration, and we're actually going to make it, I think, last a whole year, because why not? 10 years, a year, yeah, we'll see. It'll be great. Now, I want to thank Eric, Abigail, Joey, and Shira for sharing their thoughts and experiences from everything from taking MOOCs, designing MOOCs, studying with MOOCs, and just making this whole thing possible, so thank you very much. And I want to thank the staff who've helped to support this event, and a special thank you to the MITx video team who put together that impact video. It was fantastic. I really appreciate it. And I just want to thank you for joining us and for learning with us. Now, we're still working really hard to produce openly accessible MOOCs, and we'll be making an announcement soon about what those MOOCs will look like and where they'll be available. As Eric had alluded to, some will be on one platform, might be on the other platform, but if you go to the website, we have a list of courses, and it actually indicates which platform it's on. So if you go to the Open Learning website, you'll see the complete list of everything that we offer. Now, there are a few ways that you can help us. Now, you can give. A donation in any amount helps us do anything it takes to keep reducing and sharing MITx MOOCs with the world. So you can give to MITx, and I'm going to put a link in the chat. And I believe that is for everyone. Okay. And if you aren't in a position to give, then please help us by spreading the word about MITx with your friends, families, colleagues. I want to say that our team also does an amazing job on our social media channels. So reposting, retweeting, anything that we post would be super helpful. And lastly, if MITx has helped you in some way, please share your story with us. We love hearing your stories, and we, with permission, of course, we love to share them. So I'm going to put another link in the chat that you can use to share your story. Now, I want to say thank you again to everybody. And I want to say, yay team, 10 years, MITx. It's been fantastic, and I can't wait for another 10 years. I think we're all set. So be well, take care, and keep learning. Thank you very much.